Okay, hey guys, it's me again, and it's been about 3 weeks since I've had to upload one of these, but we are back at it. The LEC regular season has ended, so we are going to be moving on to the LEC group stage. So 8 teams made it to the group stage, and we're going to run those down in a minute. The 8 teams ranked, and I will not spend a lot of time reflecting on it. I don't think I will spend any time reflecting on it, actually, just because there's no point, really. Some random stuff happened. Teams that were going to be good were not good, and then teams that were going to be bad were honestly really good. But that being said, expectations were denied, but we are going to just get back to it and make some predictions, and we'll kind of run down the format for this type of video, because this is the first time we're kind of doing it. Okay, so this is the bracket I've made. We will discuss this a little bit more in depth in a second. This is kind of what the predictions are going to look like for me. Obviously this could change. We could see BDS taking a win here, or Koi taking a win here, maybe G2 loses one, who knows. Point being, this is my sort of meditated, like, full bracket for each group, because I think that if I ran down each individual matchup, like, as the time goes on, it would be too much and the quality of the videos would drop significantly. So instead I'm going to make it sort of like March Madness-esque bracket. We'll go a little more in depth when we get to actual playoffs, because there's only 4 teams, so I can go a little more in depth there. That being said, this bracket will probably be, this sort of format of bracket prediction will be probably the same for LCS, for LPL, probably not for LCK, who knows. That being said, let's just get right into the predictions. So, as you can see here, this is Group A. It has G2, Heretics, BDS, and Koi. This is actually a pretty easy group for G2 here. So I did go ahead and just say that G2 is going to very quickly just pick up 4 little wins here and get out of the group, and they'll make it to playoffs very easily. Now I'll go a little more in-depth onto why I think G2 takes these pretty handedly. We see that Heretics is the other group that's going to make it out. Heretics has actually had a pretty decent split. It's been a little up and down, but they do look relatively strong, and I think that just compared to the strength of the other 2 teams, that there's just not a lot of competition here. So Heretics will basically slip out, but as you can see, they do have to kind of fight for it. They will take a good few losses here, and I think it's going to be pretty close with them, with BDS, just because I think BDS is closest in skill level to them. So it'll be hard fought, but Heretics will make it out. And that being said, BDS and Koi will not make it out. I did have a hard time deciding whether I thought BDS or Heretics would make it out, and I'll give a little bit of a better explanation in a second as to why I think Heretics will make it out over BDS. I just think it's very close. It could go either way, but right now what I'm thinking is it's going to be a very easy 2-1. Or a very easy 2-1 bracket for the Heretics, and for BDS it'll just barely fall out. And then finally, Koi. Koi has had a bad split, to say the least. As I predicted, Advienne did not work out for them, and Mulrang has not looked good. Comp has looked shaky. The only player I can really compliment is Larson. Larson still looks about as good as he always does, but he just can't carry his heavy-ass team. So, that being said, I think that this is a pretty easy group, pretty easy prediction. I think the only thing that could maybe go sideways is Heretics and BDS, but I really do believe that Heretics can make it out of this group. And I'll give a little more explanation on that later. Okay, and now we're moving on to Group B. Now, surprisingly, this group is going to be a lot more competitive. I think these team skill levels are a bit closer together, so we'll see a little bit more competition and hopefully some more exciting series. So starting off with our first 2 rounds of Fnatic versus SK, I do think these are both going to be 2-1s for Fnatic and SK and Medlines and XL. I think Fnatic obviously takes it with the 2-1 barely, even though they lost to SK. I think they still look like a pretty strong team, and it would just be kind of insane to think that that Fnatic would lose a series to this team just because they lost 1 game. And then Mad Lions versus XL, I will say I think that Mad Lions has been on the back foot basically for the past like 2 weeks. They had a really good 3-0 week, and then they've just basically progressively gotten worse. So I believe that XL, who on the other hand has sort of had a really, really good split, and they have some reliable carries, I think it's a pretty easy 2-1 for them. I don't think it could be anything else, just because I think that despite the fact that XL's 2-1, that's a even though I think XL is a 3rd seed, I think it's a shaky 3rd seed at best. I don't even know how they ended up there. It was just a very shaky looking team. So I think that they'll take the 2-1, but it will be very, very close. Then Fnatic versus XL. I think Fnatic should still take it, but I think XL can put up enough competition, especially if they manage to win through bot. So I think Fnatic still takes it though, so Fnatic obviously makes it out 2-0, no problems. They are the second seed and they look really good, so I think that they should have no problems being out of this group. Obviously XL will face whoever wins between SK and Mad Lions, presumably, and I think that when it comes down to it, I think SK will probably take the win. SK has looked stronger. They also had a very dominant win over Mad Lions, so it seems like SK may understand Mad's style a little bit. They may understand where to take advantage, and I think SK can play to those advantages pretty well, so it seems like they are probably like the neutralizer for Mad Lions, so I think SK can take it. And then lastly, SK versus XL, I think XL just wins. I think SK, despite having a good look, where their biggest weakness is in the bot lane, and XL's strength is in the bot lane, so if they just play through bot, then I think it should really be no problem for them. And also, as a side note, Iwatodai sort of counters Cerato's best champs, just on basically what he plays. So I think that that's a pretty easy little pickup for XL. But it'll still be 2-0. This is a very competitive group, but as you can see, it's Fnatic 2-0, XL 2-1, SK 1-2, and then Mad Lions 0-2. So those will be the sort of overall bracket predictions for these teams. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically run through the first round matchup, so Fnatic versus SK, Mad versus XL, G2 versus Koi, and Heretics versus BDS. I'm going to give a little more of an in-depth explanation on why I think these matchups are going to be the way they are, because it'll give a good idea of also just a general strengths and weaknesses going into these brackets, and what their keys to win and what their keys to defeat the other team are. So it sort of can apply to everything else, if that makes sense. So without further ado, let's move on to the match predictions. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're basically just gonna run down the first set of matchups: the G2 versus Koi, Team Heretics versus BDS, Fnatic versus SK, and XL versus Mad, and just sort of give you the little predictions and give you a little bit of a more brief but more in-depth breakdown of where I think these teams' strengths and weaknesses lie, so you can sort of extrapolate these strengths and weaknesses against other teams to sort of weigh who you think will win. And as sort of also can give a little reasoning as to why I think they will win these other matches, as I talked about just now, before this. Sorry, these are unscripted, so, you know, whatever. Starting with G2 versus Koi, this is the first seed versus the 8th seed, so it should be pretty easy to say that it'll be an easy 2-0. G2 is going to just completely steamroll this team, and here's why. So, starting with the strengths, G2 has this really good ability to execute creative drafts. We've seen them pull stuff out that's really random, even during MSI, which is before spring, but it still remains the same that it's always been, which is that G2 has always been that team that plays the wacky shit. And we see that, honestly, the best of the wacky shit that we've seen so far has definitely been the Kog'Maw Braum. It's not really wacky, but just unplayed, because Kog'Maw has these weaknesses, but G2 knows how to draft around it, and so G2 can actually make Kog'Maw look as OP as he actually is because they pick the right stuff. The Kog'Maw Braum bot lane is super strong for them, and I think that if they have that, they'll have some pretty free wins, at least for the bot lane. That being said, there are other creative draft picks they've made, like the Nautilus mid during MSI, the Nico Nocturne. Even though they lost that game, they still had the lead for most of the time. They just literally made one throw. So, I mean, G2 can cook, and they cook well. Next, they can flex carry all their roles, obviously other than support. G2, every one of their 4 players who can carry, we've seen each of them have a carry game during the split. At least one. Some of them have had more than others, but that's besides the point. It just depends on how they draft. They're all reliable carries, so I feel like you can put 1 or 2 of them on the carry role each game and then have somebody be a backup carry, and they will always never not have a carry. It's really hard to beat them because literally 4 of their players are literally just the best in their role in terms of carrying. Obviously I can't say Mickey X can carry because he's a support. Like, it's just like not how that works, right? You can't be a carry pick on the support necessarily. At least, you know, we haven't seen that. They could pull up Brand or Swain or Pike or something random like that. I'm sidetracking them. That being said, they also have the best team fighting in the late game. We've seen them fall behind a bit in the early game sometimes with some wacky plays or something that I will get to in a little bit. But no matter what, it seems like during the mid game or the late game, they always have the ability to just pull it back with a team fight. It seems like you can never really be ahead of G2 because G2 will always be able to pull it back in the late game with their immaculate team fighting and decision making. Lastly, they can take advantage of even the smallest gold advantages. If they have 2k, 3k gold leads, it feels like 4 times that, right? It seems like it's really hard to fall behind against them. It just seems like they're just a really oppressive team in terms of their competition. I will admit that the competition in EU is pretty weak right now, other than maybe Fnatic. But G2 still makes it look really, really hard to beat them. And so I feel like it'd be really hard. It'd be really impossible to assume that G2 could even lose a game to Koi, especially with these advantages, or really any team, except for maybe Fnatic again. However, they do have two really small weaknesses. They can get a little overexcited in team fighting, or overzealous rather. Same thing. They can sort of push things a little farther than they need to, and then that can end up being backfired into them. And that biggest example was the Nico Nocturne game against Mad Lions, where they kind of went a little too far in the team fight, and then they ended up losing a game off of it. They don't normally lose the games off of it. Obviously, they only lost one. It was to Mad Lions, but it seems like sometimes they can give a little extra gold for no reason, which can be a little scary just based on who you're playing against. And for Koi, that can be a little scary just because of Larson and comp. But even then, I don't think that'll be enough to beat them. And once again, the early jungle mid movements are missing, which once again plays towards Larson. They just have to be careful not to int too much, even though they did int a little early versus Koi last week, or not last week, but during week 3. They still managed to bring it back, so it doesn't matter too much. So G2 definitely seems like the dominant team here. It seems like they're going to very handedly take this win. That being said, really quickly we'll go to Koi. Their strengths are small. They can play these comfort picks sort of effectively. We've seen some of them pick stuff like Shigenda on the Gnar, or Malrang like on the Trundle, which actually was not effective, but their comfort picks, Malrang is a bad example, and we'll go to that we'll go to that later, but comp on like Sivir, Shigenda on Gnar, Larson on stuff like Tristana, LeBlanc, he can play those pretty well, and he is these are definitely like some picks that you need to look out for, and it seems like at least one of them always made it through draft, so you just have to make sure you could box them in draft and make them play stuff that they're not great with. Larson's really the only exception, because I think Larson is definitely their best player. That being said, in team fighting, they have sort of shown these flashes of brilliance. They have these moments where it's like, oh wait, this is Koi. They were Rogue last year. Rogue was a really good team. It's like, oh, this is the same team. Wrong, first of all. But they do have these moments where it seems like they're competent again, and then they go back to not being competent. And lastly, Larson is their biggest strength, in my opinion. I think Larson is a great player. I think he's definitely fighting for that 3rd, 4th spot with like VTO, for example. So he's definitely up there with being one of the better mid laners, and this team has to play for him, and they have to put him on the carries, or else they're just not gonna... Yeah. That being said, I got like totally fucking sidetracked there. I'm sorry. That being said, well, again, I said that again, redundancies and such not. Let's move on to the weaknesses. First of all, Malrang. Malrang is total shit. I feel like I don't have to elaborate on that. He's still really bad. He looks really incompetent this split. And that's a mean thing for me to say, but it's true. I don't really know what he's doing. It seems like he can never really carry on any like early leads he establishes. It feels like he plays weird. His item choices are weird. He cooks up some weird stuff. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's just like weird decision making from him all the time. Secondly, the bot lane lacks synergy. I don't know why they brought in Advian for Trimby. It seems like they got robbed blind. But it just doesn't work. The bot lane doesn't work. They have these moments in lane where they can look okay, and the late game team fighting comp is still able to sometimes play it well, but it just feels like the two of them together don't know how to play around each other, and that's problematic because your bot lane you need to have a good bot lane against Hanselma and Mickey X, and they don't have one. Other than that, Shigenda's team fighting is pretty uncoordinated. Sometimes he feels like he's literally on an island, like he's not even communicating with his team. He obviously is, but it just feels like he's on another Earth compared to them, and it's just like they don't look good. So, with him at least, Shigenda just like looks completely dizzy all the time. But lastly, the team in general just really doesn't know how to play the map after laning phase ends. It feels like after laning phase ends, they completely lose any like mid-game or late-game macro. It feels like they don't even know what they're doing. And against G2, that's really problematic because G2 plays the late game and the mid-game really, really well. So it just feels like G2 is going to literally circle them like sharks and just eat them all alive. And I think that this is probably the only 2-0 in the group stage at least in these first 4 rounds, it'll be the only 2-0, because G2 is just going to completely wipe the floor with Koi. I think an extra note I'd like to add is that if Koi manages to win a game, which, by the way, I think there's maybe only like a 10% probability of that even happening, that would not reflect on Koi. I don't think that makes Koi look any better. That just makes G2 look really bad. Not really bad. If they lost to Koi, then that'd be really bad. But if G2 loses a game to Koi, just one singular game, it's worrying because this should be a team that should very easily take down Koi. I feel like there's just no reason that they should even lose to Koi just based on G2's strengths and Koi's weaknesses, right? So that being said, easy 2-0. I see no problems for G2 here. I think they're going to very handedly take this one. Okay, so the next matchup that we need to talk about is Team Heretics versus Team BDS. So in my personal opinion, I don't really know if this is going to be I don't think this is going to be a very one-sided match. I think this kind of has some interesting caveats that kind of make it very even, in my opinion. Despite the fact that I think in some ways Team Heretics looks a little bit better than BDS, I think that some of their weaknesses and potential weaknesses could come down on them during the group stage. However, I do still think that they're going to win, truth be told. So, we will very briefly run down the strengths and weaknesses of each team. Once again, these teams did not make any changes between regular season and groups. So, really quickly for the strengths of Team Heretics, so Jankos and Flackett look really good. I think they're both playing amazing splits. They've been basically really crucial in the wins of Team Heretics, including VTO, obviously. VTO has looked really, really good. As it says there at the bottom, he's a reliable carry mid, putting out a lot of damage. Their punishing and misplays is efficient and precise, and the bot combo of Flackett and Mursa look really, really, really good together. Obviously, I did that out of order, but it's just the way that it sort of played out. Yeah, so their strengths are that their players are just pretty strong as a whole. Their weaknesses is that Evie exists. Evie's still pretty bad, and even though he looks okay in some instances, and he does have this weird way of sometimes inting, and then it's almost like a planned int, kind of like the Baus, and then Team Heretics, the rest of them just kind of clean it up. It works out sometimes, but Evie is still pretty scary to have on your team, especially when you're going against Adam, who is really good at stomping in the solo lane, like 1v1s, so that can be a little scary for Heretics. The static meta hasn't really dropped off. We see it still being picked quite a lot, even on patch 13.13, but I feel like since it won't be as OP, VTO might take a small hit. I feel like it will not be damaging enough, and I think that regardless, I think he's still a better mid laner than Nuke, so his pool is a bit wider. He can play a few more things than Nuke. Nuke's very limited, and I think VTO should still be fine, but it still could be a sort of a question mark on whether or not that static nerf will impact him enough. And lastly, Mursa can get a bit too aggro on engaged sports. It's pretty well known that Mursa likes to int a little bit, and it's been nice with the Flackett because Flackett does follow up on engages, and the team does follow up on engages generally, so it has worked out a little bit for him this time, but it feels a little weird because he can kind of int a bit. But yeah, I still think this is probably the stronger team here. They do have some open holes, I think, that could be taken advantage of. The biggest being Evie. I think, personally, in my opinion, the BDS win here, with the one win they have, will probably be through top lane, but we'll see. BDS has a lot less strength and a lot more weaknesses. Firstly, Adam plays the early map very well. We've seen him roam quite a bit and kind of open these games wide up. Break the game wide open. Sorry. He breaks the game wide open. And he's able to sort of get these really big gold leads and just completely destroy top lane. And so I think that BDS's win would likely come through Adam. And their team fighting can look, they have these moments where their team fighting is really competent, and it's especially so when they're on comfort picks, like Nuke's on like Cassiopeia, Adam's on something like Darius or Olaf, Sheo's on, well, Sheo doesn't really have comfort picks, he just kind of plays tanks. Crowny's on something like Zeri or Aphelios, and then, you know, it seems like sometimes when they're on these comfort picks, they can look kind of decent. However, their weaknesses are a lot stronger, I guess, a lot more prevalent is what the word, rather. And those weaknesses are pretty simple to kind of lay out for you here. They're pretty easy figured out, and the thing about comfort picks is that even though one or two of them might make it through. It is still pretty easy to take them down by draft alone. If you hard focus Adam, it disables his ability to carry as hard as he could. Or if you draft like a really good counter pick, or etc. I feel like it's very easy to sort of route this team in draft. Sheo is consistently down in farm in early game. I literally remember it must have been the Fnatic game. Even though there was sort of a close game up until the end, Sheo was literally being flame horizoned by Razork like the entire game. Like that's just one example, but there are multiple instances during the regular season when we saw him just sort of constantly be behind in gold. And while that is sort of partially because he ganks a lot, it is also sort of problematic that his clearing is really, really bad. And lastly, Crownie is just not the carry for this team anymore. He's sort of fallen off, which is a bummer, but that's neither here nor there. Crownie just isn't really reliable as a carry anymore, and it feels like it's hard to really say like, oh, he can save this team if they need be. He's just not reliable enough to trust, so unfortunately that's kind of a big problem. I do still think though that Team Heretics will win this. BDS will get a win, likely. I think that it is very likely that it could also get 2-0'd, but I still think it's pretty hard to really 100% believe in that. So I think that BDS can get a win, but I still think BDS takes this pretty handedly. If BDS were to get a win, it would probably be in the first game, more than not. I think if BDS doesn't win the first game, then they will get 2-0'd. I think it'd be pretty hard for them to bounce back in game 2. If they do, then I'm surprised. But especially because second game, they will Heretics will have a better idea of what the draft should look like, and then they'll be able to draft a little bit better around BDS. So I really think it's hard for BDS to win this, to get a game if they don't win the first game. So that's my prediction for that. But that being said, let's move on to Group B, and we'll run down the matchups there. Okay, so the first matchup that we're going to talk about in Group B is Fnatic versus SK. Fnatic was the 2nd seed, SK was the 6th seed. Now, it does say 2-1, and you may be asking yourself, yeah, but hey, didn't SK beat Fnatic on the last day of the regular season? And yes, that's true. However, I still think Fnatic's a stronger team. I think they're going to take the 2-1. I still think that SK could still get a game off of them. SK is a surprisingly okay-looking team. And they look like they could probably snatch a game against Fnatic, because Fnatic does still have some small holes. But we'll very quickly just talk about the strength and weaknesses of these teams, as we usually do. So firstly, the strength, Noah and Trimby. Noah is an absolute beast. I think Noah and Trimby have the 2 highest KDAs in LEC, or at one point they did, I think it was maybe the beginning of the 3rd week or something. They are just a completely unstoppable bot lane. It's literally it has the potential to be, I think in my opinion, the best bot lane in Europe right now. Hans Mickey is definitely there with them fighting. I think that they're pretty good. I think that Hans Mickey might take it, but still being second best bot lane in Europe is a really good look for you. So they're just really unstoppable, and I think this is just a really good bot lane that Fnatic has because they have a very consistent carry. Humanoid and Razork have a sort of dynamic duo. They have a thing going on where it seems like they've clicked a little bit more. I think that it seems like with the ADC of Noah and Trimby, also with the support, kind of this more aggressive bot lane, they feel like they have a little more confidence in making moves around the map because they feel like they can at least rely on Noah and Trimby to carry, so if something happens, then at least Noah can make the comeback. So it feels like they're now a little more confident in doing things because they have a little more certainty, and we're seeing it because they're playing the mid jungle a lot better than they were the last 2 splits. Oscar has blossomed into a very reliable carry top. Oscar is a really, really great top laner. I think it's kind of night and day compared to how spring went for him, where he kind of shit the bed at first, and he started looking really good. He looks really, really decent. I like the way Oscar plays. I think he's a really good fit for this team, and the sort of very aggressive style of Fnatic has, very early game focused, with this ability to snowball, it really makes them look really, really good. Lastly, they have very immaculate early game and snowballing ability. I just basically said that. They have really good early game macro, and their snowballing is very reliable. If they get the early lead, they are pretty unstoppable. But then, that being said, let's move on to the weaknesses. What happens when they don't win? What happens when they struggle in the mid game, or they don't have the best early game? Their late game team fighting is a bit messy. We see that they have a really hard time closing out games. If they don't fully like steamroll the enemy team, they can have a hard time snowballing. And Razork and Humanoid can get over aggro and get a bit dizzy. Their aggression doesn't exactly switch off during the mid game, and they can kind of look for fights or get picked off in locations where they shouldn't get picked off at. And that can be a little problematic because you're giving free kills away, and that's probably a bit of a problem when you're playing into stuff like when you're playing into people who are like these sideline threats like Certos and Irrelevant. But that being said, Fnatic's still a really good team. I still think they win this series. There might be a bump with SK, but I still think they take this. That being said, let's talk about SK, the 6th seed. Again, looking pretty good for the 6th seed. They had some really important wins against teams that are good, so, you know, they are looking decent. Their strengths, they have a reliable top and mid carry when they're ahead. I think Irrelevant is actually honestly probably the most reliable carry on this team. Whether he's ahead or behind, he always looks good. It feels like he is a pretty good Jax player also. Letting this guy's Jax through is kind of scary. I don't know why you would do it. But he's definitely a reliable carry in my opinion. I think that he's probably one of the best, I think the best player this team has. Their top side synergy is also pretty good. Irrelevant, Marcoon, and Certos move around the map pretty well, which I also forgot to talk about Certos. Certos has had some really good moments to split. I wasn't all that confident in him going into the split, but he's looking a lot better than I initially thought. So good for him. He looks good. And lastly, at least one comfort champ always gets through. Somehow in the draft, at least one of these people gets their comfort pick. Usually someone in the top mid jungle, or even DOS. We saw DOS let the Milio get through, even though he hasn't lost a game on Milio yet. Hopefully Fnatic bans Milio this time. Doesn't let DOS's 100% win rate champ get through. So hopefully they can sort of route these comfort picks or somehow find a way to draft around them and not let these get through. So the weaknesses, although they are small, they are actually pretty uniquely bad for SK here, especially in this group. Their bot lane is very weak, which is pretty bad against Fnatic. It's also pretty bad against Mad Lions with Karzi and Hillsang, and it's also really bad against XL with Patrick and Limit, who have also been looking pretty good. And their late game hard throwing is very common. It seems like, just like Fnatic, they also like to throw mid-fight teamfights. I think that Fnatic may actually have the edge on them there, is that even though their teamfights are messy, they somehow usually are able to win them. They had these 2 instances where they didn't. And so if SK coin flips poorly and they just get the game where they decide to throw the late game fight, then they're going to lose to Fnatic. I actually do genuinely believe there is a possibility that SK could win this series. It would be a 2-1. I don't think it's that possible, but it's not impossible. There is a world where it happens, a legitimate world. However, I don't think they will win. I think Fnatic still takes this 2-1. I don't really know if Fnatic can take this 2-0. I think SK could at least punish them for 1 game, and again, like BDS, it may be a first game thing. If SK cannot win the 2nd game, I think, because the draft from Fnatic will be better. That's just what I think, which is kind of a weird thing to say, especially when the last matchup I was talking about, I basically the exact same thing. But I just think that that SK and BDS kind of have the same thing where they can win off of comfort picks, and if Fnatic doesn't win the 1st game, then they're going to know how to draft around SK for the 2nd game, and then they'll win that way. That Fnatic will win that way. But point being, Fnatic 2-1, very easy. And let's move on to the last matchup of this group stage. Okay, so the last group or matchup of the group stage is XL versus Mad Lions. So this is interesting because XL ended up placing 3rd, but they're only 5-4, and Mad Lions placed 7th, and they're 4-5. It's weird, even though I think Mad Lions is an objectively weaker looking team. It's just weird that way that panned out. I think both of these teams are honestly pretty weak, and it's kind of surprising that XL managed to squeeze a 3rd seed spot, but it is what it is. I still think they win this series, 2-1, as always, and I'll explain why. So firstly, with the strengths of XL, Patrick is back in form. Patrick has looked fantastic. I think Patrick and Limit are looking really, really good together. I think their late game team fighting is also pretty good. I think this team, the top side especially, likes to throw a little bit early, but their team fighting is really good. Iwatoda's late game team fighting is great. Odoamne is just back to being this great solo laner. It's just this team looks really good, so I will say that as well. It is hard to punish Odo in lane. Odo's laning is nearly immaculate, I think, against Chasey, who's had a really, really, really ugly sort of split. I think Odo will not have a single problem in this lane. Limit can also play the meta very well. It seems like he's really flourishing with these engage supports, the Leona and the Nautilus and other things. He's looking really good on. So Limit is playing it very well, and with Patrick picking these sort of aggressive ADC picks like Xayah and Draven and stuff, which sort of reward a very sort of aggressive early playstyle, is definitely making him sort of be a desirable ADC to have in this meta right now. For your team. So the way they win this game is definitely through late game team fighting and Patrick. The weaknesses though, Peach is still a little rocky. Peach looks better than he did in the first week, but he still has these moments where it's like, oh my god, this guy is like a human being that has a brain, and it's kind of hard to believe that at those times. So Peach is still a little rocky. I think he looks a little okay, but it's still not something that I would say I rely on personally. Abe's early laning is really weak. It seems like he gets killed a lot in lane, or he just oversteps. Like his positioning in lane is just some ass. I don't think I fuck with it. It's just, it's not great. And this team can also get a little dizzy, which is a little hard to explain why. But this team can kind of over-aggress sometimes. They can overstep, they can do things they should not be doing, or they can kind of get overwhelmed with like flanks and stuff, and they just get completely crashed down on. And it seems like sometimes they don't really know how to end the game, and they've had these moments where these games go for a long time, and they struggle to, successfully end or defend or whatever. So it seems like sometimes they just can be very easily routed. But then they have moments where they kind of or have clarity and they know what they're doing. I still think they are going to be in a good hands this series just because of their team fighting. Odo and Patrick as well, they just look pretty decent. That being said, let's talk about Mad Lions. Now, Mad Lions is coming back from MSI, and they had a good first week. They were 3-0, and then they completely fell apart, and they only scraped to get one more win after that 3-0 week, which is weird, in my opinion. But it is what it is. So, firstly, Mad Lions, their biggest strength, I think, in my opinion, is that they can take a big advantage of really big mistakes and will punish over aggression. Obviously, the biggest example is the Caps Nico ult. That was complete, weird int, and they won the game off of it. They do have these other examples that are a little smaller, but that's just the biggest one I could think of off the top of my head. But this team does have a pretty decent punish game, and it seems like sometimes they're able to punish weird movements and weird decisions in team fighting and mispositioning. Secondly, they are really strong in these best of 3, best of 5s. I don't exactly think I can say that as a reliable strength because they could just be total shit, but it seems like they always sort of come through in playoffs, and they had a bad start during spring, and then they ended up winning the split, so you can't really count them out just yet. I think in best of 1s they can kind of be fucked with a little bit. I think they're maybe trolling a little bit with some picks. We saw some interesting things like the Rek'Sai is just an example. So can't exactly count them out, but I can't say that being good in having a past precedent of being good in best of 3s and best of 5s is enough to say that they could win this series. I just don't think I can trust them with how they looked this split. They look uniquely really bad across the board. So their weaknesses. Chasey is throwing leads. He's had these massive leads in some games that he's just completely trolling away. He's just mispositioning, overstepping, being easily ganked. It's really sad. And I think into Odo Omne, that's a big problem because Odo is really hard to kill in lane anyway. So if you even get an advantage over Odo, it's probably going to be pretty easy. You're just going to throw it away. And that's really dangerous for this team. They can also be bulldozed pretty easily. It seems like it's pretty easy to just kind of walk all over them. If they don't win this early game, then it just seems like they aren't even there. Also, Elioya's on carry has looked a lot worse. The Lee Sin, the Rek'Sai, stuff like that. He's not looking as good. He looks a bit lost sometimes. It feels like he's just tilted. Hopefully he gets his head in the right place, because that's the only way I think they can really win this is if Elioya's on carries and does not play them like shit. So their early game sucks as well. I already kind of said that. Their early games are really bad. And lastly, the biggest weakness in my opinion is Niski. I love Niski. I think he's a great guy. I like watching him play, but he looks so invisible this split. It looks like he's not even there. So if he just continues to be invisible, they're not going to win shit. And I don't think they're going to win against Mad Lion. They're going to win against XL. Again, I think that they could win this series against XL. It's not impossible. I think that they have a better chance than SK winning against Fnatic, but I think at the time being, I don't really see Mad Lions winning. I can't say with confidence that Mad Lions can win this series because they literally have no like good precedent this split like to like go off of. Like, so what that they played the group stage well and like playoffs well last split? Like, they don't look good enough in my opinion. I think that they stand no chance. So, because they also played against, I think it was Fnatic and like Astralis or something like that, and they almost lost against both of those teams. So like even then that was a bit shaky. So like, I don't know. I can't say that Mad Lions will win. It's not impossible. I'd say that Fnatic versus SK has like maybe 10% odds for SK to win the whole series. Mad Lions is maybe like 30%. But that's, again, neither here nor there. That's really all there is for that. That being said, that's the end of this video. Like, subscribe, comment your opinions. Tell me I'm wrong about a team again like I was last time. I am kind of embarrassed I put VDS first place, but it is what it is. I made a prediction. It was bold, and you know, I ran with it. It was wrong though, but whatever. I would like to give a note. This is sort of how I'm gonna try and do these types of videos for playoffs here on out. However, for the LPL and the LCS, because their playoffs are 10 teams and 8 teams respectively, I will not be doing this sort of detailed matchup breakdown until we get to about the top 4 or like finals weekend. For LCS, I'll do the matchup breakdown, and LPL probably top 4 or also finals weekend. So I just can't do it 10 teams like this or 10 whatever's like this. It would just be too much for me. And plus LPL playoffs start like 3 days after this regular season ends, so it's just too much work for me. I think I would probably explode. But that being said, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the support, especially on the last video. I felt that video kind of blew up, the LEC video. I love LEC, I love talking about it, so give me some comments on what you think. That being said, I will catch you guys in the next video, so peace out.